Welcome to But Are There Dragons, a podcast where two friends pick a book at least one of them has not read and work their way through it a few chapters at a time. I'm your host, Kritter.
And I'm your host, Jessica.
And we're kicking off this adventure with The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, with me as the resident Lord of the Rings veteran.
And me as a Tolkien first-timer.
In this, our fourth episode, we're going to discuss chapters 8 and 9 of The Hobbit. Before we dive in, Jessica, how are you feeling?
I'm a little worried.
Oh, yeah?
I'm a little worried about our party.
Yeah, because at the end of the last chapter, they plunged into Mirkwood.
Yeah, they've been through some stuff.
Yeah, they have, to say the least. Okay, so let's dive right in.
Okay.
Chapter 8, Flies and Spiders.
Mm-hmm.
If that isn't a menacing chapter title, I don't know what is. So Tolkien gives us a lot of detail about what this forest is like. Was there anything that stood out to you before I just start listing stuff?
Yes. So one of my favorite quotes for this chapter is right at the beginning. Their feet seemed to thump along while all the trees leaned over them and listened. And I loved it and also was freaked out by it all at the same time because it felt like a thing that could actually happen, that the trees could lean forward and listen to you.
Yeah.
And then the other one was that the forest was described as everlastingly still and dark and stuffy. And I don't know about you, but I have been in parts of, forested areas here in New England where sometimes the trees are thick enough that really a breeze can't get through, and have felt stuffy like that. And it's almost a little cloying and claustrophobic and, a little bit. So I again, very descriptive, very effective.
Yeah, he said that they grew to hate it more than they hated the goblin tunnels, and to me, I was like, I don't
know about
it.
that.
But then he kind of sold it, honestly, because that sounds like it's claustrophobic, it's stuffy, and it's not just dead, right? Because on the top, other than the goblins in the tunnels, it's just rock, right, or and maybe water. But this is like I wrote down, when they lit fires at night, it brought hundreds of eyes gleaming. Like, first of all, nope. It also, I thought it was interesting that it said the cobwebs everywhere, which gross, didn't extend over or onto the path. Like, that felt significant to me, just because it's, first of all, the chapter title is Flies and Spiders, so like, let's stay away from the spiders, thank you. Bilbo noticed a bunch of eyes generally off the path. Insect eyes, but much too big, was another thing that I was like, no, thank you, pass. So even just right at the beginning, I feel like not always do we get like upfront tons of description in these chapters. A lot of time he kind of just weaves it into what's happening, but I feel like in this chapter particularly, he's like, no, we're gonna sit down and I'm gonna tell you about how absolutely miserable it is to be in this forest.
Yeah, I want you to be terrified, and I'm gonna have your biggest ally leave and say in all caps, don't leave the path, and then I'm gonna show you all the reasons why you should be terrified and stay on the path.
Right. So the path, stay on the path. The path is good. We like the path.
We like the path.
So on the path, they encounter a black stream, which Beorn did warn them about. Don't drink it. Don't even touch it. The bridge crossing it was rotted and gone, but Bilbo spotted a boat on its other bank. And thank the light, or that would have been the end of the trip right there. No solution. So they managed to get the boat back to their side with a little teamwork involving Philly, Bilbo, and a rope. And they cross the boat in fours, except Dwalin and Bombur, they go last. Bombur protests that he's always last, and Thorin tells him he shouldn't be so fat. And then he tells him something bad will happen to him if he starts grumbling against orders. So that felt really mean and kind of intense to me. How did you feel about this whole boat sequence with Thorin and Philly and Bilbo and all of them?
I felt like, first off, they're already several days deep into the forest, which is not, I know I really don't want to spend all the time comparing to the story as I've seen it represented in other media, but I feel like that's kind of glossed over, how long they've been trekking and how many days they're in this very ominous forest, right?
Yeah.
They've been here for days. But I will say that the book, it's probably the one area I think I found that it holds up the least is the casual fat shaming of Bomber.
Yeah.
And I do understand that it's probably meant lighthearted, but in today's day and age, I don't think it would ever fly.
Right. Yeah. To me, it's
And
like
then you add on top of it Thorin being like, don't you bellyache or else,
something
you'll
bad
pay.
will happen. Yeah. Like, yikes. I don't know. It's kind of bad.
But I think the tensions are running high, so that's why I brought up they've already been in this really creepy forest for days,
Yeah.
and that supplies are running low, tensions are running high, and
Yeah.
the last thing they need is a squeaky wheel. I don't think that that's a good leadership technique.
I was going to say, he's supposed to be their leader. So what are you
Mm-hmm.
doing, Thorin? But,
Yep.
I guess dwarves are a little gruff, rough around
Mm-hmm.
the edges, maybe more than your average other leader. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this made me mad. Basically, Thorin being super mean to Bomber. Like Bomber and Dwalin, they could go first. Even if they
Yeah.
need to only go two in a boat for practical reasons. Like, why do they have to go last? It's mean.
Right.
So, anyways, so they'd all crossed. And then a, quote, flying deer came upon them and knocked Bomber into the stream. So when I read flying deer, I pictured an actual flying deer. I realize now, though, that flying might have meant running. What do you think this was?
So I think I had the same moment. I think that I have been reading a few too many high fantasy books, and I was like,
Yeah.
flying deer. And then when they started, it wasn't until they talked about how the deer essentially knocked Bomber over
Yeah.
that I was like, oh, that's just fanciful wording for they were going so fast.
Yeah, it was flying as in fleeing. It's like well, never mind. I don't want to skip ahead, but there's another moment in movies where somebody says fly when I think they mean flee, but we don't have to talk about that. Although I know you've seen the movies, but still.
Only a million times.
Yeah,
but yes, we'll save that moment. I did make note of the deer though when they spotted it, because everything had just been talking about how nondescript and dark and stuffy and everything was, and the deer was the first living creature that they had encountered. People had made a point of telling them that like you won't find anything worth shooting at on the path. This deer interacts with them on the path. I can tell you that based on my notes going into this moment, I was like, is the deer a red herring of some kind? Like, is the deer real?
Yeah, no, I had the same thing. Like, what's going on with this deer?
Immediately suspicious. Like, why is there a living thing interacting with them when they were told nothing living would be on the trail? So my note, was it real or was it somehow magically the forest was taunting them? And then not a matter of minutes later, the deer went by them again, and they used up their remaining arrows. So now they have no arrows left to defend themselves. So to me, in my heightened sense, I was like, this was intentional. Somehow the forest did this to taunt them.
Yeah, I just feel like that. And I guess like the first deer, the hart, I guess they call it, which I assume meant buck. The first deer Thorin got, right, and it died, but it died on the other side of the stream. And based on what happens next, they can't go get it, which to me is like so sad, so depressing, such a waste. This beautiful animal is just gonna lie dead, and presumably get eaten or whatever. And then I also wanted to mention that they did see these little black squirrels everywhere. Like there were black squirrels, but that was like the only living thing that they saw other than like the eyes on the outside of the path.
Which is creepy.
Yeah, eventually they do try to eat the black squirrels. I don't know if it's before this or after this. I can't remember, but they're not. Turns out they're just not. It doesn't go well. Yeah, it doesn't go well at all. So they're worthless. Yeah. So anyways,
and then poor Bomber somehow gets essentially knocked into the water, which induces him into a magical sleep, which I guess we shouldn't say poor Bomber, right? Because all appearances, he seems to be sleeping happily with a small smile on his face. So
Yeah.
I guess lucky Bomber is what I should say.
He got the better end of the deal, I think, than all the rest of them.
Yeah, except for then they had to carry him, and there's more grouching about how big he is.
Yes, which is got a little annoying. But so eventually, after again, we're talking days. Like they are in this forest forever. So Bomber's asleep for a very long time, and then he wakes up. But when he wakes up, he finds out there's no food because they literally they like imagine everybody has a big pack, and by the time Bomber wakes up, the packs are emptied. So like that's how long they've been in the forest, even though they've been rationing. So he finds out there's no food, weeps and laments having been woken. So yeah, he was having a much better time asleep than awake. He was having an amazing dream of a feast and a woodland king, and Thorin cuts him off, not wanting to hear about dream food, telling him that if he hadn't woken up, they would have left him and his idiotic dreams in the forest because he was, quote, no joke to carry. This once again felt really cruel to me, and like this whole sequence in the forest made me dislike Thorin like kind of a lot. I don't know. How are you feeling about him right now?
No, agreed. So between the beginning of the story where he was giving real politician vibes, and now, you know, the team is actually hitting some really hard times. And that's when, as a leader, you're supposed to be at your best. And nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect. But it doesn't seem like Thorin's really set up or executing like the leader that he's been portrayed in my mind for years.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's a little bit of a disconnect there for me, you know, that Thorin is a figure to be who was admired and would be followed as, you know, the prince, the young prince. And that is not what we're seeing, at least not yet in the story.
Right. I agree. And I do wonder if it has something to do with the fact that they're dwarves. Like maybe that's just a different style that they have, but I don't love it personally.
Yeah.
So yeah, not a big fan at this point. Did you have something?
I did. So by the time we got here and Bomber's waking up and talking about the Woodland King and the Merry Feast, and they had heard disquieting laughter throughout the forest, I have notes here going, this is giving me such fairy vibes. So different types of stories that I've read over the years talk about, like, if you're in an enchanted wood, you know, you stay on the trail, otherwise you might get lost and the fairy might take you. And that can mean all kinds of different things. But I was like, this is just huge fairy vibes. Hearing random laughter, seeing random lights, all of it off the path, and then they're going to chase it and it disappears. It feels a lot like, especially the way the fairy were portrayed in some Arthurian legends that I've read over the years. It just really reminded me of that.
So I haven't read a ton of books with fairies. LOL, I did read ACOTAR, but they're a little different than like what you would expect from fantasy fairies. To me, I literally wrote, this is giving sirens to me, because it's like, although I have heard that fairies actually have like lights and stuff. So this, it does feel, you know, based on what I've heard, I haven't read, but it does seem fairy, but it's literally like these like attractive, you know, alluring figures or whatever, in this case, lights and food and merriment off in the distance, and they just want you to get off your ship and go to them, right? And it's like the ship is the path, stay on the dang path, and they just don't
stay on the path, guys.
Yeah. And they don't even stay, like, they don't even leave one person on the path. They're like, you know what? One of us should go. No, we should scout it out. No, that's crazy. Maybe we should just stay on the path. Absolutely not. Let's just all go. And they all go. And I'm like, boys.
It's legitimately what I wrote. I'm like, so not only did you not stay on the path, but all of you,
as a whole,
just as a group, left the path.
Where's the sense? Like, yeah.
So the other thing that I had here, I made a comment about the omniscient narrator. So here during this part of the story, first off, the narrator says if they had known more about it and considered the meaning of the hunt and the white deer that had appeared, they would have known that they were at last drawing towards the eastern edge and would soon have come if they could have kept up their courage and their hope to thinner trees and places where the sunlight came again. So, two things, right? One, the omniscient narrator, but also the omniscient narrator who's like, of course, this is incredibly obvious. Everybody would know this, except how would we? How would we know this narrator? But okay. And then once they have Bilbo go up the tree to try and scope out their situation, you know, he gets, I loved the description first off of the, wow, my brain just stopped. Full
Butterflies?
stop. Butterflies. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow.
That's okay.
So the purple emperor, actually black emperor butterflies. I thought that was very, very pretty, very interesting. And I had written that, you know, Bilbo's gaze as much as he might, he could see no end to the trees and the leaves in any direction. And then the omniscient narrator goes on to say that if Bilbo was a little bit smarter, then he would have realized just how close they were because of how tall the tree was versus this, that, and the other thing. And I'm just like, that sounds like he rolled a crappy survival check. That's what that sounds like. But also, can you cut Bilbo some slack? He's never left the Shire. So, you know, be nice. Play nice.
Well, I mean, it's not even Bilbo's fault, too, because, like, the narrator's like, okay, and then they start heading downhill. And then they're like, Thorin gets the idea to send somebody up a tree. So it's like, can you, I mean, granted, I guess you could just have gone downhill, but what if you are in a valley? Nobody's going to consider that for once. Like, yeah, it was frustrating. And then I like how they were all really jealous of Bilbo, like talking about the nice breeze and the sky and the butterflies. And you're like, literally could not care less about this. Like, move on. Yeah, so poor guys, they were not smart. Like, this whole sequence, they were just, and I get, you know, starving, desperate, claustrophobic, upset, whatever, you know, but man, in all caps, you got told to stay on the path twice, multiple times. Listen up next time. Okay, so we're entering the spider part of the chapter.
This was hard.
Yeah. So first, Bilbo wakes up by the way, whenever Bilbo went into the circle of one of these fairy elf circles, he fell asleep, right? So, you know, this is a thing that happens. But and then he gets separated from all the dwarves when this happens again. But he decides, you know, he just has to sleep because he doesn't know where they all are, and there's nothing to do it at night. Doing it at night is stupid. So he falls asleep and he wakes up and there's a great spider trying to wrap him in a web. Like, first of all, so anyway, so he fights back, managing to kill it, and then falls unconscious. You know, relatable. So when he wakes back up, he's bolstered by the fact that he managed to kill a spider all on his own. He felt a different person, fiercer and bolder, and decided to assign a name to his sword, Sting. This was a little, I don't know, it was like a heartwarming little sequence after a lot of gloom. Are you similarly bolstered, much like Bilbo?
I am, but also I think that it's important because, to your point, we had discussed it in last week's episode that Bilbo doesn't get taken seriously. And I think that part of that stems from Bilbo doesn't take himself seriously, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And do I want to see Bilbo become a murderer of spiders or anything else? No.
Yeah.
But to be a small person, but to feel fierce is a very empowering thing.
Yeah, small but mighty. That's I loved it, and I don't know that I would have called the sword Sting. It's never been my favorite sword name. Whenever you compare it to things like Goblin Cleaver and Foe Hammer, you've got Sting. How do you feel about the sword name? Are you into it?
Oh, I like it better. So Orcrist, Goblin Cleaver, Foe Hammer, all very. I want to say like uppity, but they all sound like big people swords. You know what I mean? And
big,
I think
important people. Yeah.
fits the Hobbit way.
Okay. I could see that. It's good
I
for a
just
Hobbit.
feel it's very on brand for his experience. It's not a mighty sword for a mighty person who does mighty things, but it is his.
That's a really good point. All right, so Bilbo searches for his friends, ring on, of course, and comes across the following. A place of dense black shadow ahead of him, black even for that forest, like a patch of midnight that had never been cleared away. As he drew nearer, he saw that it was made by spider webs, one behind and over and tangled with another. Suddenly he saw too that there were spiders, huge and horrible, sitting in the branches above him. Also, they were talking about how and when to eat the dwarves. How did this make you feel? I hated it.
Terrified. Again, it's a different setup than what happened in the movies, but more subtle and therefore that much more terrifying. So him just casually waking up to being wrapped up.
Terrible.
Terrifying. And him coming across them, and the way that the place was described, all of it, just very, very well done. This was very unsettling to read. I can't think of a better way to describe it than just a very unsettling read. I don't really think of myself as somebody who's really scared of spiders, but this was a lot.
Yeah, I would say I hate spiders. I just I do not they creep me out, right? Like I've interacted with them. If I have a little one that's on the ceiling, I'm not going to be like, I'll just live with him. But if there's big ones and they're coming towards me, then I'm like, okay, death to spider. Let's figure this out.
So I'm somebody that does I want to go to Australia and New Zealand, but
the spider
so
big.
Issue, they're huge. They are huge. They've had to catch them in tubs. Anyways, that's not the point. Stay on task.
Well, I have to say one more thing, that's mildly on task, but I gifted The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings to my sister, who does not read for pleasure. She barely made it through Harry Potter, when it was the thing to read.
Yeah.
She did her level best, but stalled out super hard once she got to the spiders. And I feel that's kind of fair. It's not the most pleasant chapter.
Read.
Yeah.
It was a hard read. I thought that it was, I don't know. I guess at some points I get to a place where I kind of flip a switch in my head and I'm reading for appreciation of how challenging it is to tell this in a written media form as opposed to seeing it on screen, because I can't escape that. By and large, a lot of the media I consume now is
visual
video. So, at some points during the read, I'm just like, wow, that's I have goosebumps. Holy cow.
Eliciting.
I get really into it because I'm really appreciative of what a good job the storytelling is doing.
Yeah, for sure.
I definitely made note about Addercop and Tom Noddy. Okay,
I did too. Yeah.
So, and this is also a coping mechanism. So some things really horrible, I might look at I might hyperfixate on one particular detail. One of the things I love about being a fantasy girly is that I love when they give us their own nomenclature. I love when they give us their own slang, their own name calling, they're all this, that, and the other thing. The other thing that was so much fun is Addercop. Again, I'm on an e-reader. I'm on my Kindle. So I highlight a word when I don't recognize it to see if maybe, this is just a very English word and I'm not familiar with it, because that's a real thing that happens sometimes. So when I got to the part where he is taunting the spiders by calling them names and it gives us the term Addercop and Tom Noddy, I highlighted them to see if the Kindle told me anything.
Yeah.
Did you know that Addercop is an actual extinct genus of arachnids, of spiders?
I looked this up too. And so I did after I looked it up. Yeah.
So I thought that was wild. And the other thing is that they seem to have, so the way that Wikipedia told me, so I'm taking no credit for this information, Kindle gave it to me, that it's an extinct genus, excuse me, and it's thought to be close to the origin of spiders, and they had like a little tail. So they just sound. So on top of being a slander, it's an evolutionarily appropriate slander.
That is so. So Tom Noddy is apparently an English word for a foolish person, like an old
No, I
English
did not.
word
So thank you, because
for a
I was
foolish
like,
person.
what the hell is a Tom Noddy?
So I looked it up, yeah, and that's what it said. But it's also super fun fact. It's also the name. The first thing that popped up is it's the name of an American bubble magician from the 1980s. And I'm like, what are the odds, first of all, of somebody like, given the fact that that is apparently an English word for foolish person, somebody has a child someday and they're like, oh, you know what he looks like? My last name's Naughty. I'm going to call him Tom. Although, you know what, now that I'm just now thinking, maybe that was his stage name and maybe he called himself Tom Naughty on purpose because he was foolish while he was doing bubble magic. Anyways, we are way far afield.
That's okay. We go off the track sometimes. It's okay. But I think
It's
that
true.
honestly it adds cool points if they did take it on as a stage name, because they did know that, because that's a pretty random factoid. I've never heard Tom Naughty before.
Yeah.
And then another comment to the narrator saying, of course it's insulting to anyone.
Of course.
And yet again, the narrator going with information that's given to them, but not necessarily
not all of us.
me.
Yeah, of course. Like if I were talking to him, I'd be like, totally.
Yeah.
But then I would be Googling on the side.
Yes.
So Bilbo's leading them all away, singing these insulting songs that he's making up on the spot, which the narrator assures us, like, they could be better, but, you know, he was making them up on the spot, so
he's under duress.
Give him a break. So Bilbo steals back, kills another spider that was staying behind, and he sets to freeing the dwarves. All 12 dwarves freed, and they fight a pitched battle against the spiders, during which Bilbo finally has to reveal his party trick with the ring. They break free and begin an elastic retreat until the spiders finally give up. Massive relief once they get free. Or are you still on edge? Like, are we good?
I was relieved. I will say there was a couple moments mid-battle. There was a moment where it said that Sting shone with delight as he stabbed them, meaning the spiders. And so this is now a third time where an item that's being used is being given an opinion or a feeling.
Okay, so we've got the ring, the sting, and then the purse. The purse. I thought that's what you were talking about. Yeah, okay.
So I was like, okay. And again, that's not something I've heard anybody anywhere mention before, that Sting likes to kill.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not what's happening, but that is how that read to me. So that kind of gave me pause for a moment.
Likes to kill evil. Also.
Right. The other thing that I wrote is that I had a little awe moment for Bilbo, where I was like, he's being heroic and he doesn't even see it in the moment, that things were looking pretty bad again, and then suddenly Bilbo reappeared and he charged at the astonished spiders unexpectedly from the side, shouting, go on, I will do the stinging. So I don't know if he was just feeling his oats or not, but that's
heroic,
brave behavior, like not unequivocally.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I was just kind of proud of him in that moment. He questions what he brings to the party. Lots of people question what he brings to the party, and I just remember reading that and being like, "Oh, buddy, you're doing it."
Yeah. The dwarves, like, once they get settled or whatever, demand an explanation from Bilbo, like, what do you mean you have a ring that turns you invisible, basically? But, like, that does not diminish their newfound respect for him, right? That makes him even cooler, because having something like that is pretty amazing. And so I totally agree with you. Like, not only are you thinking, like, you're really doing it, the dwarves are thinking, like, dang, we got ourselves a pretty solid burglar. And I'm for the first time thinking, okay, Bilbo, now you're finally pulling your weight. Like, well
Yeah.
done. It took time, but here we are. You just had to warm up a little bit. And yeah, I was proud of him too after this, I think.
He had some growing up to do too. You know, I think of Bilbo as living like a sheltered child lifestyle, and
yeah.
all of this time on the road, he's learned a lot.
Yeah, I think so.
And then I wrote the way that the narrator worded it, that once they defeated the spiders, they quote unquote went back disappointed to their dark colony. So just again, you know, it's very dark, black, and ominous and scary. Very well done.
Also, the word colony, when it comes to spiders, like, that implies that there are a lot of spiders.
The numbers. Yes, the numbers.
It's a lot of spiders. And yeah, it's just really well done. And I didn't like it. But I liked it, but I didn't like it also.
But I will say that I did start to come down, and it wasn't until the book told me that I realized that we did not have Thorin.
That was the next thing. Turns out 12 dwarves freed from the spiders. Not all the dwarves. There are 13 dwarves, let's all remember. And so the party realizes Thorin is missing, along with all of us. And we find out that the wood elves had taken him. So I pinpointed a little literary umami about the wood elves here. In the wide world, the wood elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, but loved best the stars. Like, those guys. They sound pretty cool. Kind of romantic, even. I don't know.
So I love that description. I will say that I kind of zoned in on a different description, which is that they are characterized as more dangerous and less wise than the elves from Rivendell, which again just kind of added to the unease. Like, yes, we survived the encounter with the spiders, but hearing that about the wood elves, and knowing that they have taken Thorin, now I'm like, oh, maybe we're not quite out of the woods, so to speak.
LOL, out of the woods.
LOL. The other thing, sorry.
No,
sorry.
you do you.
So as they're going through, taking their breath and realizing that, you know, the 13 of them are okay, and they found out about Bilbo's ring. That was the moment where Balin got his vindication for not seeing him when he came down the mountain. So, and I just totally related to Balin in that moment. Like, I get it. He's a little bit older, right? And he's been around the block once or twice, and he really wants to know how the blip that guy got by him, and now he knows what it is, and he feels better. And man, if that's not relatable, I don't know what is.
Yeah, the way he falls asleep chuckling to himself, oh, Bilbo.
And then of course the last piece was just that knowing about the ring and the disappearing, and it's still not lessening their opinion of him, and how heartwarming that was, you know. Because it's not everything. Just having a magic ring isn't enough.
No, especially because, like, the way he showed up against the spiders, you know, he took the ring off for certain moments and really held his own, for sure. Okay, so the wood elves and their king lived in a great cave that was their palace, fortress, dungeon. The king loved treasure. So despite having that in common with Thorin, he imprisoned Thorin when Thorin refused to confess as to why he was traveling through Mirkwood. They did not treat Thorin badly, though. He got food and drink, which he sorely needed. So if you were Thorin, would you have spilled the beans?
No, I don't think I would, but I also have a little bit of a stubborn streak. So I think that, yes, he was given food and drink, but he was still taken prisoner. And then also to find out that he was taken prisoner because of some old beef over somebody stole somebody's jewels that has nothing to do with Thorin or Thorin's family.
Right.
I would not be inclined to be cooperative. We'll just put it like that.
Yeah. Well, and we've already kind of established the general animosity between elves and dwarves. And apparently these elves aren't the wisest. So there's all these things like, you know, Thorin has proven himself to not exactly be the most amiable person either. And so we've got like like less wise elves who love treasure, this dwarf who's kind of prickly who also loves treasure and knows about some, and yeah, it feels natural that they did not get along, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the narrator ends this chapter by letting us know that Thorin was soon to find out what was going on with his friends on another adventure, during which the Hobbit showed his usefulness again. Do you like these little spoilery tidbits we sometimes get? Like, we kind of talked about them. It might have been last episode, though. But yeah, I think they're kind of fun.
I do. I think that it's neat that it's another way for the narrator to stay involved in the story and to kind of show their hand that they are still guiding things.
Yeah. Omnipotent narrator. So any final thoughts about this chapter before we move on to chapter 9?
No, just here we go again, out of the frying pan into the fire.
More or less. Yeah.
Instead of the goblins to the wargs, we're from the spiders to the woodland elves. TBD.
TBD. We shall see. Okay, so chapter 9, Barrels Out of Bound. The next day, the wood elves capture the dwarves, like immediately, as they wander in the forest looking for the path. But Bilbo slipped away with the help of the ring. And as the dwarves are led into the mouth of the cave, Bilbo hesitates, not so sure that he shouldn't abandon them. He does decide to go in at the last second. So I have to be honest, every time he hesitates like this, I lose a little respect for him. So it's not like he's the quintessential hero, is what I'm saying. That also probably makes him more real. But how do you feel about these moments of weakness for him? Like, I'm expecting him, he had that turn, he feels heroic, he's, he names his sword, he's amazing, he's rushing spiders to try to protect his friends, and then he hesitates to go into this cave. And I'm just like, what are you doing, Bilbo?
I think that on this count, I'm kind of the opposite. So the fact that he pauses reinforces for me that in the end he still makes the right call. The fact that he pauses doesn't make him less to me, it makes him more, because there is something to be said for just rushing in without taking a second, and there's no crime in my mind to be scared or overwhelmed, or not saying that that's what you're saying. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
No, it's fine.
I don't think that pausing and not doing it is a different outcome. The fact that he pauses and he still rises makes it more brave for me. Wow,
that's a totally different perspective, and I like that better. Honestly, I don't like to be disappointed in people, right? And I was like, after all this, you're literally going to be like, should I? But I guess if you look at it that way, where you're like, okay, I've been in a cave before, I did not like it, but I'm gonna go, so okay, no, that is the better way to look at it.
There is a case to be made for it's very difficult to be brave if you aren't first scared.
Wow, that's deep. Okay. So the dwarves are brought before the king, and he says they don't need to be tied up anymore because, quote, there is no escape from my magic doors for those who are once brought inside. A little foreboding, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of the Elven King, who shall remain nameless, apparently.
Yeah, right? It's, different from the movies. Because in the movies, that guy's...
Well, I mean, but if you're going to be a king, why don't you have a name? True. Anyways, I had a couple of things on here. One was that, he's wearing... I feel as though there's a real contrast between the way his appearance is described, which to me sounds very benevolent and druidic. Yeah. And the way that he comes across, which is, you're in my playground now. Like, you're in the Thunderdome.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, and it doesn't take me out of the story by any means, but his appearance belies his actions.
Yeah. Like, he's incredibly fair, which is very elfy, and like I just have to give a shout out to Lee Pace in the movies, because that man is just so attractive. Like, wow. And the way they dress him, the way he had his like head ornament, all that stuff. Like,
but
and
the
so I could,
way that he carries himself, like his performance there is just so committed.
yeah. And it's fierce, which is perfect because he's so beautiful, like this, this guy is described in the book. But then when he talks, you're like, oh, you're kind of a, you're kind of
Not
a bee.
so great.
Yeah, you're like not the nicest dude.
Yeah.
So interesting. So after refusing to answer questions, the dwarves also get put into cells like Thorin did, and Bilbo kicks off a long and lonely stint as an invisible burglar, mapping out the caves, stealing food, hardly sleeping, and occasionally slipping out with hunting parties. He thinks this is the dreariest and dullest part so far of this tiresome, wretched, uncomfortable adventure. As the reader, do you agree with him?
I mean, I don't know if it's the most tiresome. It does sound a lot like purgatory, right? Like it does sound like he can't go. First off, this goes on for weeks. So this is another thing where this is kind of a departure and I don't feel like time is represented. This goes on for weeks. So can you imagine just days and days and days on end of you can't even like, where do you sleep so that you don't make noise and somebody doesn't stumble across you? You can go outside, but like, where would you go? You can't even leave your party because you can't get beyond. You need your party to survive. So even if he could, which I honestly don't think he would, I honestly don't think he would in cold blood leave his party behind. But even if he were so inclined, he doesn't have the skills to get far without them. And, just a rock and a hard place, just stuck in limbo, in the worst kind of limbo, going, what could I possibly do? And so to just do that for weeks sounds awful. I don't know if it's the dreariest, I think that sometimes the words that Bilbo uses are almost comical.
He's a little drama king. But
I was gonna say that he kind of undersells it a little bit. Like, I don't know if boring, dreary. I would have said, terrifying and harrowing. But okay, sure. Maybe I'm the drama. Am I the drama?
Okay, I guess it's like when he say, in this, he also describes as I said, the adventure as tiresome, wretched, uncomfortable, which fair, but it's just the way he kind of gets down on things sometimes, especially when he's hungry. Like when he's hungry, man, you will hear him complain. Like, well, the narrator will complain on his behalf for him. But yeah, sometimes he can be a little...
We all know how relatable it is to get hangry.
It's true.
I did like his quote. I'm like a burglar that can't get away, but must go on miserably burgling the same house day after day. And I just thought that was hilarious because, only Bilbo.
Poor guy.
It would only happen to Bilbo. But through that time, he finds where each of them is kept, which again, that's the way it's worded in the book, which to me kind of implies that they are in different places. Like it took time. So it's very clear that Thorin is separate from all of them. But he had to track them all down individually. Yeah. And the other thing is that how convenient that he's recently had the conversation with them about his magic invisible ring. So that when he does start speaking to them, then they know that, they're not as surprised. They know he can go invisible.
Right. That would be a little surprising. So Bilbo tells them all that he's there, right? And they're like, one of the first things that they think is like, oh, thank God we're not going to have to tell the king about our treasure. To me, it's like priorities. I guess I'm in a dungeon or whatever. I'm in a cell in a hostile environment, because otherwise why would they put me in a cell? But, by golly, I really didn't want to tell that king about my treasure. Now I don't have to. Amazing. These dwarves they're a lot. So Bilbo falls into a bit of luck. No surprise there. He seems incredibly lucky. And on the night of a great feast, the chief guard and butler, both of whom would necessarily be involved in an escape plan involving food barrels that Bilbo had previously sorted out, fell asleep in a particularly strong wine they decided to sample. Bilbo swipes the keys, frees the dwarves, and once they hear his plan to smuggle them out through the river gate in barrels, the first thing the dwarves do is complain. So are dwarves just whiners? Or do you
They
think this was fair?
are terrible. They are
Terrible.
super bad, awful. It makes me so mad. And I got to tell you, when Bilbo clapped back, I was so freaking happy. I am like, you know what? We established in last chapter that they are looking to you for answers, like legitimate, real answers. Like all of a sudden, you're the dude to go to. Why then is it that when you are in a tight spot, and I am literally the only person on the other side of the wheel, that you're gonna poo-poo my idea? So the quote was, well, and infused with whatever level of frustration you can imagine, come along back to your nice cells and I will lock you all in again and you can sit there comfortably and think of a better plan. But I don't suppose I shall ever get a hold of the keys again, even if I feel inclined to try. I was like, the shade, but yes,
they
brother.
Deserve it. They deserve
yes,
it.
brother.
Yeah. So Bilbo, like he gets them all out. Obviously, he's scared to death, and he mentions about this dwarvish racket, which he's commented on before. He ends up returning the keys to the guard, though, because, quote, he wasn't a bad fellow. This struck me as like so random. Do you think this spoke to Bilbo's character at all, or did you just nothing it? Yeah.
No. I loved it. First off, the keys on the way out and the way back. It said when he took the keys that his heart was still in his throat. So again, just another, you can't be brave if you aren't scared thing. Like, even though he's invisible, he knows that the stakes are high and he is scared, but he really wants to help his friends. And then, of course, putting him back because he doesn't want him to get in so much trouble. And I love that about him. I really do.
He seems like a sweet guy. He really does.
And then they talk about, as he's loading his friends into the barrels, a couple of throwaway comments about what it is to be really hungry, because he's having to, scavenge a meal off of a windowsill and this and that. And I was like, think about how the Bilbo and May would have felt about having to take a meal versus now. I thought that was a very telling, again, just a throwaway comment, right? Like, it has nothing to do with the plot, but it does show how far Bilbo has come.
Yeah, absolutely. So the dwarves get stowed by Bilbo, as you said, and shortly thereafter, some elves come down to dispatch the barrels. So the way the elves interacted was kind of delightful to me. They affectionately called the butler an old villain. And by the way Andy Serkis does them is that they're slurring their words because they were just partying and all this other stuff. They're like, where's this old villain? So the butler claimed he fell asleep waiting for them as if it was their fault and as if he didn't drink super strong wine. And then they teased him about it because they could tell exactly what happened. So like that was really fun in contrast to the like really mean or intense king interaction. And so it seemed merry to me after such intense sequences. Did the tone change affect you at all? Are you used to this like whiplash now between POVs?
Well, I think that in the beginning of the chapter the narrator does let these are elves that are merry too, that are singing, that are celebrating, that love to party under the stars. I think that the king's interaction, I think that they did a good enough job setting it up so that the king's interaction when he's questioning his guests is, an outlier in terms of behavior. That these fellows are portrayed as very jolly, merry, partying kind of fellows. And I think that for me, the contrast in that moment was the grumbly dwarves who had been smushed into the barrels. I don't have that quote, but there was one of the one of Thorin where he sounded like a big dog being put into a small kennel. Just, you know what I mean? So Bilbo's fighting for his life. He's fighting for his friends' lives. He's smushing them into barrels and nailing the tops down, and he's hiding in the corner trying to make their escape. And that's how his friends are treating him versus the contrast to these very merry, slightly drunk elves.
Yeah. That is it's a pretty sharp contrast.
Yeah.
So Bilbo hadn't considered that he would also need to escape with the barrels, ideally, if he was going to keep together with his friends. So while the elves sang a farewell song to the barrels, which I thought was really poetic, Bilbo grabbed the last one and went down the chute. This next part with him bobbing and freezing and trying to stay afloat gave me a fair amount of anxiety. Did anything stand out to you from this whole sequence?
I was reminded yet again that Bilbo doesn't know how to swim.
Yeah. Extra anxiety because of that.
Yep. So I absolutely felt for him, but could also relate to I can't care about my friends right now because I am legitimately just trying to stay alive.
Yeah. Like they might be drowning. Who knows?
I might be drowning.
I might be drowning. Can't think about it. So the barrels escape the caves and spend the night along a bank. Bilbo snipes a meal from the elves, as you mentioned, who were there to handle the barrels. And I got a kick out of this part. So it goes, he no longer thought twice about picking up a supper uninvited if he got the chance. He had been obliged to do it for so long, and he knew now only too well what it's like to be really hungry, not merely politely interested in the dainties of a well-filled larder. So that kind of like pinged me, and it dawned on me that he maybe has never actually experienced hunger, like at all, because hobbits eat like every hour of the day, right? Yep. So it's like when it comes time to eat, it could be more of a polite interest rather than an actual hunger. So I thought that was a fun way to phrase it personally. Yeah. So also that little bit of internal dialogue just screamed Hobbit to me, because like of all the creatures, of course, like politely interested in the dainties of a well-filled larder, like yeah, very, very dainty.
Only a Hobbit would talk like that.
I know. So were there any, we're coming towards the end of the chapter, were there any other passages or bits of literary umami that you flagged from this chapter that we haven't talked about yet?
Let me just I had one other, so this was from the beginning of the chapter. I skipped it by accident. One was they referred to the dwarves referred to him as remarkable Mr. Invisible Baggins, you know, before the plan, right? Before they poo-pooed his plan. That's what they called him. Another one was a comment made by Bilbo. It was a weary long time that he lived in that place all alone and always in hiding. And I was just like, oh, buddy.
Sad.
It's really sad. And then I had all of us must escape or none, and this is our last chance. Talking about getting the dwarves out of there and into the barrels.
Yeah.
The last thing that I had was honestly the end of the chapter. So one is drawing near the end of the eastward journey. So again, kind of the narrator's bookmarking. Up to this point, it's been, you know, the eastward journey. So feels like another transition as we go into next week's episode. And I just thought it was a great cliffhanger, right? They had escaped the dungeons of the king and were through the wood, but whether alive or dead still remains to be seen. I really hadn't even put it together that he doesn't even know if they're alive in those barrels.
Yeah, that was the cliff. Like I wrote that exact thing down because that was when we finished this this chapter, you know, because we read a big chunk of chapters all together, and it was like, this is where I have to end, literally. Like we got through Mirkwood, all of that stuff, and this is where I'm stopping. They might be dead, who knows? Obviously I know, but it's still, I wanted to see what happened next tonight.
Transitions are hard, man.
They are, yeah. And so it's funny how we did end up having multiple transitions, you know, between, like, it's almost like he kind of, the narrator designates sections of the book, right? So you kind of have a natural section at the very beginning with the dwarves all coming to the Shire and all that stuff, and then, you know, you've got the trolls, and then the goblin section, and then the Beorn and Mirkwood and the elves are all this big section, and now we've got the next section, the end, the final section, according to the narrator, kind of, maybe. So yeah, pretty exciting times.
We don't know.
Possibly.
So that brings us to the end of what we're talking about in tonight's episode. And in looking ahead, what we're going to be reading for next week is a little bit bigger. It's chapters 10 through 13.
Yes,
for
though
next week.
do be aware that we may skip a week of new episodes because of the Thanksgiving holiday, right? So
Yep.
we won't be recording, that we might have a single week delay between episodes. So just be aware of that after Thanksgiving.
Yes, I
Yeah.
will have to. We can probably drop that on our socials, right, Critter? When
Yeah.
we know what our bye week is.
Yes. Yeah, we will do that for sure.
Okay, great. So, but that's the plan. So, we're looking at chapters 10 through 13 for our next episode. So, we'd like to say thank you so much for tuning in to episode 4 for our podcast, What Are Their Dragons? Brought to you by your hosts, me, Jessica Sadai, and Critter XD. Please don't forget to follow us at But Are There Dragons on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and But Dragons Pod, just one T, on X, formerly known as Twitter. You can find Critter at CritterXD, Critter with a K, on YouTube, TikTok, and X, and at Critter_XD on Instagram. You can find me by searching for Shelf Indulgence on TikTok, Instagram, and X. So that's it for tonight. We're still workshopping catchphrases, so let us know on socials how you feel about it. Here's tonight's. Remember, you are over the edge of the wild now and in for all sorts of fun wherever you go. Thank you and good night.
Bye.
Bye.